Terminator was the genesis of a movie franchise with a dark fame, but does the original still hold up in 2024? Let's talk about it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back. The Out of the Storm podcast. Daniel, can you introduce to the people what we are doing today?
So this is Have You Seen, in which we talk about a movie that some of us know well and others have just seen for the first time. Today we're talking about The Terminator from 1984, which I've seen many times, and the two of you have just seen for the first time. So what are your impressions?
This movie, it was really good at producing that feeling of, is he dead yet? And I just enjoyed like the whole constant thrill that Arnold produced, especially with his facial reactions. That was freaking hilarious. It was like he was trying to understand what facial reaction to use when something happened, especially when he was getting shot, which was amazing. But yeah, overall, I think the Terminator, in terms of like the Terminator, Arnold, he is what made it for me when it comes to the movie. In terms of it was just a constant thrill, death and punishment from both sides, from the Terminator side and from obviously Sarah Connor and her people then. But overall, I had a surprisingly good time with it. I still think it has the old movie problem, which is like the acting can feel slow at times, which is what I like when the movie started, I was like, okay, I think I'm gonna have an issue with it because I just like sometimes I don't know what it is, but just like old, like just acting in the old movie just felt kind of very slow. But whenever Arnold came in, then my interest, I wasn't bored. I was like, okay, this is great. But of course, there was other things as well which made the movie good. But just Arnold for me was my highlight.
This is a great movie. As a caveat, I've seen Terminator 2, but don't recall seeing like Terminator 1 at all. But this does a lot of things well. It gives you a really good kind of like feeling about sort of kind of like the current world versus sort of what's set sort of like years in the future in terms of like the setting and how they kind of like differentiate and stuff like that. I feel like a lot of the cast or like sort of the characters that are in this, like Sarah Connors and Arnold Schwarzenegger, like you mentioned and stuff like that, I feel like they're very strong in this. I feel like Arnold Schwarzenegger really does bring some really menacing presence, and there's just like something about him, the way that he talks, the way that he moves, that just kind of fits like what a Terminator, what you can imagine the Terminator would be in this universe. I mean, the story's kind of, it's not overcomplicated, and it's like easy enough to follow. I mean, there are like questions that I do have about sort of how things kind of like loop around in terms of like the time travel aspect of things, but I feel like the story is kind of like simple enough. You got like good character development in there as well, and it's just overall it's just like a good movie, to be honest.
Honestly, as also just to add quickly, and like just with Arnold as well, like he just added that persistent threat, which I felt was refreshing, because I feel like with movies a lot of the times, like in terms of like the villain or the antagonist, like you'll see bits of him and then it'll build up to like the end moment. But with Arnold, it was just constant. He was just always coming, and at like if like you saw he was at full strength, you know what I'm saying? So yeah, I just enjoyed the whole persistent threat aspect to it.
Yeah, I think this is one of those areas where an actor can maybe not be the greatest actor in general, but if they're right for a role, then it just works, right? Like there's something kind of mechanical and stiff about him that in any other role, and we've seen him in other roles where he just plays regular people, where he's maybe not the greatest actor, right? But I think in this he's just exactly right. Nobody else could have played it quite the same way. And there have been some great performances of Terminators in different things, but I think there's a reason why this kickstarted Schwarzenegger's and Cameron's career. So one thing I'm really interested in hearing is whether or not the reveal works at the start, right? So in the first 15, 20 minutes or so, Kyle Reese and the Terminator are framed in the exact same way, right? They both appear under the same circumstances. They seek out Sarah Connor, they acquire guns, they steal clothes, right? And I think based on what we know about the Terminator and the Terminator franchise, we know who the good guy and the bad guy is, but it's supposed to be a reveal exactly who Kyle Reese is, right? And that they're both trying to find Sarah Connor, but then once they find her, one is a protector and one is a killer, right? So if you're seeing this for the first time today, like what kind of impact did it have, if any?
I was gonna say no. I definitely saw a lot of the similarities in terms of like how they sort of came into the world. In terms of the impact, because of course I've seen the second Terminator and kind of know that story, it didn't really like have that same impact as like someone watching it for the first time would have, where you have these two people that like sort of have the same, not the same objective, but are sort of kind of framed to sort of want the same things essentially, and then obviously you have the reveal. To me, it works. To me, like if you was like a person watching it for the first time, it works because you're kind of confused and you're seeing Arnold Schwarzenegger sort of like kind of like being violent, being sort of being violent towards people, just kind of like you said, just like stealing and all that stuff, and obviously like imposing himself as a threat in the movie. And then you also have like the John Connors, which you're sort of kind of made to believe is sort of meant to be like a little bit similar. So I can see.
You mean Kyle Reese, not John Connor?
Sorry, Kyle Reese. Yeah, I can see how like that would have a good like kind of like plot twist or like just that kind of like reveal or something like that, but it just didn't hit the same because I kind of know what was meant to what's to come essentially.
For me, I thought it was well done. Obviously it added mystery. Of course, like when Terminator appeared, I could already sense that he was the bad guy. But with Kyle Reese, it was like I didn't know what his motives were. Because even the way that Sarah Connor was acting, obviously when she even thought he was a threat at first. I thought that was well done. I said, oh yeah, that's a reasonable assumption because he was just weird. He was just like always edgy and always itchy, and he's following someone. So he just gave off that vibe, like who the hell is this guy? Even when he did actually not kidnap her, but even when he saved her, there was a scene where he like gripped her hair in the car, like whoa, what the hell? Like, is this guy really the good guy? So I think he really played that well. In terms of like the impact that it had, I wouldn't say it had like a. When you say impact, what do you mean?
So I think if it's 1984 and you're watching this for the first time, you don't really know, other than having seen the poster, you don't really know what's going on, right? So you don't know who Kyle Reese is. He's framed in the exact same way as the Terminator, right? In terms of how he pursues Sarah Connor and the steps he goes through and stuff like that. So what I'm basically saying is, if you're watching this for the first time, does it still have that impact? And I guess the answer is, well, there have been 27 other Terminator movies, so we know that Arnold is the bad guy. So I guess it doesn't really work anymore, which is a bit of a shame.
But I didn't know who Kyle Reese was though. So when I found out, so I was thinking, I was like, who the hell is this guy? Like at first I thought, is that her son? But then the scene when they ended up lovemaking, I was like, oh, okay, that's not us.
Probably not.
Yeah, I was like, okay. And I was like, and then I started to realize, like, oh, okay, so that's.
I mean, at that point, we've gotten the exposition, right?
Yeah.
And it's like a solid 20, maybe even half an hour, where we just don't know who he is.
Exactly. Yeah, I had no idea. And I was literally trying to figure out who the hell he is until the lovemaking. So I was like, oh, so that's who he is. But it's crazy. They came all the way to the past just to impregnate her. That's pretty mad. That's pretty crazy. But yeah, it was. I think it was a good build up. For me, it was a good build up. In terms of the impact, I wouldn't really say there was much of an impact in terms of like, I don't know, like from a cultural sense where I'm like, oh, that's a moment that's a moment that I always remember from a film. Now, I wouldn't say it was that impactful, but in terms of just how it was done and if I enjoyed it, yeah, I enjoyed it and it was done really well because I would have been a part of the audience wondering who the hell was this guy.
For me, what I would say probably held up better was that mystery in terms of like, is it her son or not? Because even though I had seen like some of the other movies, I couldn't quite remember them clearly. And even like through parts of it, I was like, oh, is it like the son that's come back to like protect the mother in this situation? And then I think it became a little bit clearer later on in the movie that it was actually sort of his actual like father that he sent back in time, and obviously he didn't know it and he wasn't aware of it. And you're then kind of
at which point for you did it make sense?
I think once
I
think once it was like super clear, once they had like a few interactions in the movie, and I think it became super clear that he wasn't going to reveal that like that was his mum. I was like, okay, it makes sense for it to be his father in the situation, which then raises the question in terms of like the time travel aspect of it, because it just seems like they're in like an infinite time loop in terms of like she gets pregnant by Kyle Reese, she has John Connor's, future happens, and then he has to send her back. So it's like, can like the future ever be changed if it's a constant loop of like him being sent back to be John Connor's father?
Yeah, I think this movie has the benefit of being the first movie in that franchise because at this point, it's keeping the whole time travel thing relatively simple. Mm-hmm. Right? Kyle Reese talks about how he comes from a possible future, and this is what happened in his world, and the future is not fixed. They can still change it, which also means that if the Terminator succeeds, then John Connor never gets born, right? And then as the movies go on, it gets much more complicated because you're getting additional characters and more events, and it gets quite elaborate over time. But I think in this, it just works. Right? And I think it also helps that Kyle Reese is not a scientist, right? He says at one point to the police, "I didn't build the damn thing. I'm just the passenger," right? And he can't explain it because he doesn't know how it works. And I think that's a good choice.
Mm.
One other thing I think that's really important in this movie is Sarah Connor. What's your impression of her? Just based on this movie, ignoring the second one if you've seen it.
So I've heard of this name quite a lot, right? And okay, firstly, how many movies is she in?
Well, the character is in 2 movies and a TV show. And
Okay.
in the TV show, she was played by a different actor.
Okay.
Is she in Genesis as well?
I don't even know if I've seen the newest ones. I think she like an older Sarah Connor appears in that too, so probably 3 movies. But no, I'm not sure about Dark Fate. I don't know.
Because her name has pretty much like, it's very prolific in this whole genre, right? And it was definitely like good to see her, like especially when her and Reese had like a scene where I think she was pretty much doubting herself and talking about how she pretty much trying to downplay herself, as in like she doesn't really have that much importance. I think there was a scene when they were hiding in some sort of cave or something. I don't know if it was a cave, but it was something similar. So like kind of seeing her from doubting herself to actually becoming someone who kills a Terminator, like the progression of that was cool to see. But in terms of like this prolific character, I'm still kind of like waiting to see that, because I don't think I fully was that the moment in terms of like her killing the Terminator? Was that the moment where I was like, okay, this is Sarah Connor?
I don't want to go into the next movies. We'll get to them when we get to them. But just in this movie is a standalone. She does have a very clear character arc, right? She starts off as a completely average person who has never picked up a gun, who has never been in real danger. And she's kind of a victim throughout the movie and then gradually gets more and more agency, right? Both because of the danger she is in and her rising to that occasion, and then also her learning stuff from Kyle. And then at the end, it's only her and the Terminator, and it's kill or be killed, right? And then she manages to kill the Terminator in that hydraulic press. And then at the very end, I think like the final scene for me is maybe the best final scene in a movie, where she has fully embraced this destiny, right? And she's making preparations for this inevitable thing. And she's kind of acquiring, like she's moving into position, she's acquiring all the skills she needs. She's getting ready to raise this son, right? And then she literally drives into the oncoming storm. Mm-hmm. That's the last shot of the movie, which I think is just brilliant. Right? It's maybe obvious, but it's just great symbolism. Where this gas station attendant says, "A storm is coming," and she says, "I know," puts on her sunglasses and just drives towards it. That's just it's a sledgehammer in terms of symbolism, but it just works.
Yeah, I think you summarized that well.
But at that point, it's completely earned, right? Because we've seen her grow step by step. And we've seen her learn lessons, and we've seen her endure through difficult situations, and we can kind of see where she picks up specific skills or where she learns specific lessons. And it's a very gradual development over the course of the movie, right? So first of all, did that jump out at you as you watched it? And 2, did you buy that destination?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think you summed it up well, like how you kind of like laid it out before, but definitely you could kind of see she was just like your average type of girl. I think she even says that she's like a person that couldn't even like balance a checkbook at one point in the movie. And then I think there's that scene where he like puts the gun in, like gives her the gun, and then I think he like walks out or something like that, and you can kind of like see her kind of like awkwardly like holding and looking at the gun for like the very first time. You can kind of tell that like it's starting to dawn on her sort of like the situation that she's in and like sort of her new reality at that point. You just see the confidence grow, and you just kind of like see how she like just like develops through the movie. And I feel like it all made logical sense. There wasn't like any, random jump in character. Like, when she kills the Terminator, it doesn't come out of nowhere. It's something that's, you feel like it's been building up to. And even like the situation where she sees that Kyle Reese has died, so she knows at that moment in time, it's like it's just her versus the Terminator, and it's literally for the sake of the future, she has to do what she needs to do. So I feel it's like completely earned, and I feel like this is a great way to write your character and bring it to like bring up the diversity point, because I feel like there was like much ado made about sort of how like you need like strong female leads and this, that, and the other in some like modern movies and stuff like that. But what we've seen from sort of from this movie and what we're seeing from sort of the Aliens movie as well with Sigourney Weaver is that they were doing it really well in the 80s, and somehow it's just been lost in translation how to actually write a strong, compelling sort of female character in sort of certain movies.
I think Ellen Ripley and Sarah Connor are very different people.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly because Ripley is I think is more like she takes to the role quicker, whereas Sarah Connor is just a person, right? Who happens. She strikes me as maybe somebody who survives, like a civilian who survives a war and comes out as a different person on the other end, right? So it's not quite the same thing, but ultimately they're both written as people and they both have personalities and their journeys is the point of the story, right? So like I think a lesser movie would maybe have had a character scene where Sarah Connor is just a regular person, and then the action scenes start, which may have been directed by a different director or whatever, and then she just picks up a gun and is a badass immediately. And I think in here the whole point is getting her to the point where she is that, right? It's not like the character moment is not an excuse, it's the entire point.
But one thing I did enjoy, kind of going off what you're saying, one thing I did enjoy and like what they did with her character is like they didn't present her as someone that was like a damsel in distress. Like she had something about her. Like even when she noticed that obviously there was a lot of Sarah Connors being killed, and then she noticed, oh crap, she could be the next one to check the whole yellow book and stuff. So even though that's kind of, it's not obvious, but it is obvious because like I feel like a damsel in distress type of character would have been very ditzy and clueless and like, oh, like, okay, it's just a coincidence. But her, it's like she had like wits and just she could tell that she had a purpose. If that's what I'm just, she had a purpose and she just needed certain situations and kind of like mentoring. And well, obviously Calvary's didn't really mentor, but he kind of did mentor her in a way because obviously
yeah, sure, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So she's kind of like under his wing. So it's good that she wasn't, like I said, it's good that she wasn't dazzled and stressed. It's good that she wasn't ditzy. It's good that they present her in a way that she has something about herself, but she just, she had to be put through what she went through in order for Sarah Connor to be Sarah Connor.
I think she starts out as one, but then changes because one by
as
one.
in the damsel in distress.
Yeah, at the very beginning, yeah. Where she just tries to survive. She's panicking. She's trying to get to the police, and then it turns out the police can't help her. And it turns out that everything Kyrie's has said is correct, and that means that nobody can help her, and that means she can only help herself. But
I feel like a damsel in distress doesn't really react to danger, but her, she kind of reacted to danger. That's why for me, I don't really see her as a damsel in distress because she was very proactive towards it.
That's maybe a semantic argument, but I would say like in the beginning she wants to be and needs to be rescued, and then by the end she's learned what she needs to not be that anymore, and she acquires those skills over the course of the plot, right? So maybe you might not call her that because she doesn't stay that, but I would say in the beginning she is, and then towards the end she isn't.
Maybe it's because she had heart. That's why I feel like she had a lot of heart. So it's like that showed a lot, which is really good.
Yeah, so I think generally Sarah Connor just has an amazing character arc in this, and I'm with her the entire time, at every step of her journey. One other thing that kind of jumped out at me is that how 80s this movie is, not just in terms of that it happened to be made in the 80s, but if you're gonna make a movie about the impending apocalypse, then the 80s is probably one of the best times to make it, right? Because the 80s are kind of in retrospect known for rampant consumerism, and everybody is very focused on materialism and things like that. And that kind of setting really, I thought, had a really interesting contrast to both what we hear about and see in the future. Like there's a few scenes where Kyrie's kind of just looks around, or he does something, but it's framed in a way where he's kind of disoriented by all the stuff that's around, right? And then we see a flashback to him kind of growing up in among the rubble, basically, just trying to just survive. In the flashback, there's this shot where they're in the settlement where the humans are hiding from the Terminators, and it looks like two people are watching television, but actually there's a fire in the television. I don't know if you caught that. Yeah. So there's this whole juxtaposition between the bleak dystopian future and the shiny consumerism of the 80s. And I don't know if this was on anybody's mind in 1984, but kind of over time, that era has kind of acquired that reputation, right? And so that's the perfect time for the world to end, right? Or for somebody from the future trying to prevent the end of the world, right? Because they're just surrounded by shiny things and wealth and pointless pursuit of stuff. I don't know, that just jumped out at me as I was watching it.
Okay, so the 80s, I had no idea. So that was kind of like known.
Yeah, that's kind of what the 80s are known for. And when you watch movies from the 80s, there's a lot of that's the era of the shopping mall, and the movie Wall Street is also set in the 80s and stuff like that. So that was a time when people were very focused on just having luxuries in their life. And so for both the Terminator and for Kyrie's to be surrounded by this luxury all the time, Like a lot of this happens in shopping malls, for instance, right?
Yeah.
And there's like the scene where Kyle Reese is fleeing from the police and he's kind of scavenging clothes because at that point he doesn't have any. I think he grabs like a coat and shoes and stuff like that. And he's probably surrounded by more clothing than he's ever seen in his life. You could probably outfit an entire settlement with what's in that shopping mall.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a scene as well where him and Sarah were hiding out in the house, and then I think she asked him what we eating, and then I don't know what food he was preparing, but it was like I don't know what type of food
it was some survivor kind of thing, right?
Yeah, so it was like, so then it was like you're surrounded. You could literally go to a freaking corner store, steal something that's going to be better than that. So yeah, it was. It was refreshing to kind of see like what the A's were like. I feel like it was definitely like just watching the film. Like I didn't know that's what the A's were like. So would you say it was pretty much an accurate look of what America back in the day looked like? It looked like that. Would you say that was accurate?
It looks like any other movie set in the 80s or made in the 80s.
Cool. So it'll pretty much be like a true reflection. But yeah, it felt very refreshing actually seeing that. And just the tone of it felt very. Maybe it was slow because that's what the 80s were like.
Yeah.
Who knows?
I actually don't think this movie is slow. I think this is perfectly paced. Like every scene kind of builds towards what it is.
Sorry, I meant the acting in terms of like the tone overall. Yeah, 100%. It was good pace. That's what I said. Like it was thrilling. Like a slow film can't be thrilling for me personally. So
but it's also not like a non-stop action thrill ride, right? So it's not all chases and gunfights and explosions. There's a lot of talking in this, and there's a lot of suspense, right? Where Kyle Reese and the Terminator are moving into position or trying to outflank each other, or the Terminator just a scene where the Terminator just does maintenance. But
it was just enough action though. Because my point that I made before was like sometimes with movies, I think it's annoying, but they give you a bit of like a sense, or they give you a bit of a feel of what the danger is by having like a little scene where you'll see the actual antagonist and then just builds up to the end. But this one, like I said, it was constant, but it wasn't like just throughout, as in like he'll pop up in the right bits.
Yeah, I think this movie is also something that's kind of been lost in action movies, where there's a lot of talking in all the action movies, right? And the action is kind of the payoff to what's happened, but that's not like a 30-minute fight at the end. And I think this kind of finds that balance perfectly, I think.
And the scene, which I think I will remember for quite a long time, was when his human vessel actually melted and then it just went out. You know the scene where you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, that scene was actually amazing. I don't know, he just felt very.
Where skin is burned away and only the skeleton remains. Yeah.
And then the way he was moving as well, I was like, oh crap.
Yeah, and it's been foreshadowed as well, right? Because he loses his eye at one point, and we see the iconic red robot eye, right? So we kind of see what he's like underneath, and then towards the end he loses his entire skin, and we've both seen the Terminators at the start, like in the flashbacks to the future, and also we've seen the Terminator's red eye, right? And now we see the entire Terminator just fully exposed and just in his true form, right? So it's a payoff in that sense that's been set up throughout the movie as well.
I don't mean to be a pooper, but what would you say? Because we're praising this film a lot, which it should receive praise, but was there any faults for you guys? Because I remember he did mention in terms of the whole time travel thing. But like, what besides that, would you, like, for you, Daniel, personally, because obviously you watched this one of your favorite movies, were there any faults for you that you thought, okay, maybe they could have done that a bit better?
For me, this is a borderline perfect movie, just in terms of structure and pacing and acting and pretty much everything. It's just incredible how much detail there is paid to like every line of dialogue and how things are just put together, right? Like this whole thing about how it's a major plot point that the police can't reach Sarah Connor because her roommate is wearing the headphones, right? So this piece of technology, right, that is just distracting her from the world. So the call goes to voicemail or to an answering machine at that point. And the message, something like, you're talking to a machine, and be nice, even machines have feelings. Like that's kind of the jokey answering machine message. And it just fits perfectly. Like the symbolism is really obvious, and but there's stuff like this scattered throughout the entire movie. If I would say that something doesn't work, I would say it's the very end. Like the effects have not aged great because it's stop motion, and it looks very like everything looks great, including the Terminator makeup and the mechanical hand and the eye and everything. It all looks great. But when the Terminator is actually moving in stop motion, it looks a little bit janky. You kind of have to roll with it and say, okay, that's what they could do in 1984. And also plot-wise, the fact that it's not a character payoff that Sarah Connor wins in the end, but that they just happen to be in a factory and the Terminator just happens to be stuck under a hydraulic press. And that is the one thing that he doesn't have a plot armor against. That's the part that doesn't really work, right? It's not clear to me why a hydraulic press works and an exploding tanker doesn't, right? Like it's kind of like the kaiju problem where the monster is invincible until it's time for the story to end, and now it's vulnerable. Right? Yeah. So that part I think is not great, but everything else is borderline perfect.
So where would you say the state of the franchise is at now? And if it's in a bad place, what did they do? Like, how have they moved away from how the first movie was created?
So I think the good ones are Terminator 1, 2, and some episodes of the TV show. And everything else has the problem that it doesn't really know what to do with the story. It doesn't really know how to move the story forward. It doesn't know where to take it next. Salvation tried, because that's centering the resistance against the machines, but that's not a great movie. But I think the last couple of movies have had the problem of, we want to make a Terminator movie and we're kind of just repeating familiar stuff from the good ones, but it's not really going anywhere. And I think it's a bit like the Alien franchise in that sense. And we just talked about Alien Romulus, right? Where I think that franchise was in a similar place where for decades it was going nowhere. And then somebody had an idea of what to do in the universe, right? And then it doesn't look that difficult anymore. And I think with Terminator, we're waiting for a Romulus for Terminator, where somebody says, okay, we have an idea for a story that tells us what happens next, or just in a different corner of the universe, just an interesting story in the Terminator universe. I think that's been missing. I think that's why the franchise has been so stagnant, which is what makes it interesting to kind of go back to the beginning again, because this is a very small and self-contained story, and you wouldn't necessarily know that it spawns a 40-year-long franchise with several movies and games and comics and novels and whatever else. It's just a very simple story. And like, Hervé, at the start you said something about how you had questions about the time travel, and we can get into that, but the basic idea of it is pretty simple, right? In the future, there's a war against the machines. The machines lose, so they send an assassin back in time, and then the humans send somebody back to intercept. That's kind of the story, and it's pretty simple. It just when you try to build on that, that's where it gets complicated.
Yeah, I think my point was just more on the it just feels like they're stuck in an infinite time loop. In terms of like, it doesn't seem like there's a point where you can kind of like alter the future with sort of the events of like sending a Terminator back, because it just seems like they were like kind of like rinse repeat with that.
Yeah, they do go into that in the following movies, but even here, Kyrie says, "I am from a possible future, and it can still change."
Yeah.
But this is what happened in my future.
For like this movie, it kind of like it works. It's sort of very self-contained. It's a very like simple thing. It's like they've been sent back to the past to try and save the future that they're sort of that they've got over there. So it works. It just like had that like one question in terms of like what's the like overall impact of it. But yeah, no, for the movie it works perfectly fine.
Any other things that kind of stood out? Maybe things that worked, that didn't work.
You kind of touched on everything that I was going to mention, even like down to like the effects and stuff like that. I was going to like mention that, but I think you like touched on it as well. In terms of like, I agree with you in terms of like a lot of it works throughout the movie in terms of sort of when he's like sort of repairing his eye and stuff like that. Even like the futuristic setting that they have, where they kind of like have this like blue tone around it, you can just kind of like see how like bleak it feels, and obviously they tried to make it for its time. They tried to make it futuristic in terms of like the guns that they're using and like the like laser beams and stuff like that. So a lot of that worked. I agree with you. Like the end CGI was like a bit chunky, like when he's like in this exoskeleton. So yeah, without rehashing like too much of like what's already been said about like the characters and stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know if I've got too much to add.
And honestly, I don't care how bad the effects look. Like, even if the effects looked like, I think, like you said, the only thing that really looks bad, I think, is the endoskeleton at the end.
Yeah.
But even if everything looked terrible, I would still think it would be an amazing movie, because I'm there for Sarah Connor's journey, right? Yeah. Like this whole thing about being pursued by this killing machine, and the point at which she realizes that she will never be safe again. Unless she kills it, which she can't really, or doesn't know how she could possibly. Right? There's a scene at some point. She turns to Kyle and says something like, "This is never going to stop, is it? Like, it's just going to keep coming." think it might be after they escaped from the motel, where for a while they were safe, but eventually the Terminator will always find you. And I think that really works. That's really effective. Because like when I talk to people who don't know the movie very well, Terminator is kind of the example of a dumb action movie, right? Like this is just 2 hours of gunfights and one-liners, and this is not the movie, right? This movie is pretty smart. It has interesting ideas. It's about something. The action is a vehicle for a character journey. So I think I don't know how widespread this is. Maybe this is just the people I talk to, but I've always kind of seen people think of the Terminator as it's just a dumb action movie that was good for its time, but it's not worth paying too much attention. And I think that's exactly wrong. I think this movie is how you do an action movie. And I think it kind of straddles the line between action and horror as well, because the Terminator is primarily a source of fear, right? The fear that you'll never be safe again. Like just from a script writing standpoint, from a character standpoint, from a thematic standpoint, it does everything right. Everything you would want out of a movie. Even 40 years later, it all works. Right? I don't think there's very much where I have to kind of ignore what I'm seeing in order to enjoy it. And not many movies from any era can say that about themselves, right? Like, this movie just works.
And I actually don't think the story's too complex as well. I don't think that they're like doing anything that's like out of the ordinary or sort of something that is difficult to replicate in terms of like how to sort of kind of like naturally progress the story and how to naturally sort of kind of like progress your sort of characters from one place to another. It's just simple, and that's part of the problems I have with like some modern sort of action movies where it's like too much action. I think we like famously like I had like a really bad reaction to The Beekeeper at the start of the year when that came out, where it just seemed like nothing really made sense within the story, and we were just getting like all this action stuff. And for me as a person, I don't really like, obviously you want to enjoy sort of good action in the movie, but it's not sort of what I'm there for. It's not the primary thing that I'm there for. And I think, again, like you mentioned, like as a person that doesn't really care for action too much or the action stuff in this, like this movie was a great movie, like away from the action, away from like the effects, away from all of that. It's just a really good, simple story. And again, it doesn't need to be anything complex like a Dune or something like that. It doesn't need to be that. It's just a simple story. You have likable characters. It progresses sort of in a logical way, and then everything else is a bonus.
And I also think this movie shows the difference between a complex movie and a good movie, because this movie has no subplots. It doesn't really have side characters. Everything is in service of the conflict between Sarah Connor, the Terminator, and Kyle Reese. And everything else kind of is there to support that. Right? There's no fat to like what scene would you cut if you had to cut it, right? What line would you remove? Like there's maybe a few that are maybe not entirely essential, but they all work towards this one goal, right? And I think that is why it has stood the test of time so much, and that is why it's so enjoyable, because there's just no nonsense. It's just one idea, and we're going to do this idea, and we're going to do it as close to flawless as you can, and still be a real movie.
They could have easily got distracted with like the whole police stuff, because like you'll see in like certain movies they'll have police as like additional characters that they're like also like on this chase to trying to catch the Terminator while the Terminator is trying to catch Sarah Connor, and then it could potentially have been a distraction in this movie. Whereas like the police
you can have more characters, you can have I don't know what. You could have a side plot where Kyle Reese kind of interacts with consumer culture or something. Like you can imagine stuff you could add to this movie or other characters or something. And it's just not there. Like if it's not essential, then it's not there. And I think it's really like what I imagine a perfect script to be, because there's nothing there that's in the way. There's nothing that distracts. It's all just one thing, and it tries to do that as good as it can.
No, agreed.
And that's a rare thing in movies, right? Like a lot of the time, movies are these chaotic things with too many cooks, and things are there because they're obligatory or because a focus group said they should be there. Or this is just one or two people sat down, had an idea, hashed out a plot, and then made a movie based on that plot. And it's one of the great classics of the genre, of the industry, of the medium.
No comedic relief necessary here.
No, like there's no comic relief character. There's no bad jokes. Nothing's dated, right? Like if this movie had been made in the 2000s, you can imagine the kind of jokes that would be in there, and that would be dated within 2 years. It's not nothing like that is here. It's very much a product of its time, and I think it would be a very different movie if it had been made in the 90s or in the 2000s. But there's nothing in it. I don't think there's anything in there that's dated.
No, I wouldn't say so. In terms of like the next movie, Terminator 2.
Yeah.
Now I do know that they make a certain change, and I don't know, Jonathan, if you've seen Terminator 2 at all.
I can't remember. I can't remember at all.
Yeah.
So since you're the one who hasn't seen it yet, what are your expectations?
Sarah Connor's journey.
In what way?
That's the truth. As in.
So is there another Terminator and she fights it again and she wins again? And
I'm sure there's going to be another Terminator trying to kill her. Or obviously now she's pregnant, I believe.
Yeah.
She was pregnant. So pretty much going to try and kill the baby, and then we're just going to continue seeing her grow. I'm just trying to figure out. I don't know if there's going to be a twist. What the conflict is going to be, because we already know that, okay, cool, they need to stop her from giving birth to John Connor. But like, besides that, is there going to be anything else different? Like, because we already know what, like I said, we already know what the Terminator is out to do. But is there going to be anything? Well, like we'll talk about it. But is there anything else that's just going to be that wow factor? Because like you said, the storyline is simple. So I'm just intrigued to see if it's just going to continue with the simplicity and just continue with that storyline, or it's just going to add anything to make it a bit more different.
Yeah, just as a bit of foreshadowing, in our Aliens video, there's a comment there that basically says, Aliens is either the best sequel or it's the second best after Terminator 2. It's kind of debatable which of the two you prefer, just to raise the expectations a little bit. All right, any other last thoughts on Terminator? Does it hold up? Does this have rewatch potential? Does it go on the shelf?
This has strong rewatch potential. This holds up very well in modern day. This is a movie that you can keep playing to your kids, etc. like that. This holds up really well.
For me, it's a tricky one. I'd say I had a very good time watching this. I'm just now thinking, like, I'd rate it. Like, if I'd rate a strong 7. If I would, in terms of rewatch potential, I'd say yeah, I could see myself watching. I wouldn't be straight away, but I could definitely see myself watching this again. And then if I had kids, I'd definitely show them this film.
It's like some movies where you watch them once and you enjoy them enough, but you have no desire to ever see it again.
Well, those don't mean they're bad films, though. Because there's some films I'll just watch once and that was an amazing movie, but I wouldn't watch it again. Because I only started rewatching films because of you two. I never used to do that before. I was like, oh, that's a great movie. Guys, thank you very much for tuning into today's episode. We hope you enjoyed. Hervé?
Yeah, we're on the road to 100 subscribers. So lock in with the boys. Like, share, subscribe if you're also enjoying the content. Yeah, and just keep continuing to be on our journey with us.
All right, guys. We will catch you next week. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.